But the most important thing is to remember that we don't need to wait for government and banks to allow us to create money. Anybody can go out there and create money-like things. So, now that we've realized that we can go and create money, why would you go and do that? Most people are kind of quite happy with the way the system works and certainly don't feel any desperate need to go out there and change the money system. But a lot of that comes from the fact that most people just don't spend much time thinking about the money system, its impacts, its implications. So I'm not going to cover all the kind of flaws that we see in the current money system, but just pick on a few, again, just to highlight why doing something about this is not only good if you believe that Scotland's on a straight line towards independence, but it's also good even if you just believe in a prosperous, resilient Scotland who should just be innovating and trying new things in this area. So the first thing to think of is that the current monetary system and financial system that it kind of sits within is systemically unstable. And so this lovely Venn diagram here is from an IMF report. And so what they catalogued was all the banking crises, debt crises, and currency crises that have happened just in the last 40 years. And so what you see here is over about 400 different crises that have hit pretty much every country in the world in the last 40 years. What you have here is a system that is systemically broken. It continues to boom and bust without fail. It's really that we've allowed the banks to monopolize such a huge volume of our money supply, the creation of our money supply, that it's in fact no longer generating the positive outcomes that it was maybe 100 years ago, but it's in fact leading to lots of negative outcomes. And so we've given this huge power to the banks to create all this money. And so what creating this money really means is that they decide which sectors of the economy need kind of investment. It's kind of a way of allocating new money into the economy, where it's important to think about new ways of creating money and new ways of allocating money, because it's diversity in those. It's not just having, if we just created the ScotPound and use exactly the same rules for creation and allocation as the British pound, then we haven't really created a more diverse or resilient system. We've just kind of duplicated a similar problem. It used to be that was kind of the end of the presentation. It was like, oh, here's a big problem. Well, here's money, and like we could do loads of cool things with it, and then it's a really big problem. But there weren't really many proposals for how we can really move this forward and really do something about it. So that's really what NEF and Commonweal were trying to do with this proposal around ScotPound, is how can we move this forward without a fully independent Scotland? Is there anything interesting that we can do that is more significant than kind of a community currency, which can have really great benefits at the local level, but which doesn't really change the economy with a big E, the macro economy? So we wanted to try and see if we could do anything for that. So the idea that we came up with, and I think two things before we kind of delve into exactly the exact configuration of an idea that we put together. It's definitely not the only currency that Scotland could implement. There are lots of other great ideas floating around at the moment. In fact, in a couple of months, we're doing a really interesting session at Edinburgh University with 4 other leading organisations in kind of the alternative currency movement, where we're all going to put forward our own idea and really debate those 4 different ideas, because this isn't just about, oh, it will only work if you do ScotPound or something like it. It's really about encouraging a debate and getting people to think about what works best for them. It's about having small local currencies, it's about having regional currencies, and it's about having different national currencies. The one that we're focusing on today, and I'll spend a bit of time explaining to you, and then I really want to leave some questions. I've been talking a bit too long, so I really want to leave some questions. So it's a new national currency, which again is different to, apart from maybe the Veer in Switzerland, it would be the only kind of nationally focused alternative currency. Then in terms of creating and allocating it, we wouldn't be creating it with any kind of debt liability. I won't call it debt-free. It's a term we're debating at the moment because from an accounting perspective, we always have to have a kind of liability to somebody. But none of us would be in debt. The Scottish Government would not increase its debt by creating this money. And as you saw how the banks allocate, so they decide to allocate a little bit to businesses, they just allocate most of it to property and then a lot of it to speculation. Well, we say let's bypass allocating it like that. Let's allocate it directly to people. People is in fact the most useful way of spending it into the economy, especially when we're talking about relatively small amounts as we are in this proposal. The second bit then, as I was just speaking about, it's then thinking of a payment system as a public utility rather than as a rent-seeking private enterprise. So rather than creaming 3% off every transaction in the economy, what about if it didn't take anything off every transaction in the economy, and instead we met those relatively minimal costs through general taxation. And then we would want to create a network where people could use this new currency, and that would be both in businesses, for goods and services, and then also for certain personal and business taxes. That's kind of the overall idea. You know, a lot of people find it then hard to conceptualize what you would actually do with this money, and so this chart is just a short explanation of and the spendings for sterling would look very similar to this. And this is really where all the work goes into creating a currency. So famous economist Hyman Minsky has a great quote which I read out all the time, which is that anybody can create money, the problem is getting it accepted. And that kind of really is a really accurate picture of the money area. So we could create this tomorrow. I could set up the bank at Alba personally. You don't need the Scottish Government involved at all. I could create 1 billion ScotPounds tomorrow, distribute them to people that I knew, but the problem is you wouldn't have anything to do with them, and so they wouldn't actually be worth anything. So the bulk of the work, if this proposal would go ahead, would be to be creating this network. So we would have to encourage people to want to get excited about the currency, to want to use the currency. We'd have to encourage businesses to join in and accept the currency, but not only accept it, but also then take on board that they would have to respend it. And there can be a whole sort of ways. So, at New Economics Foundation, you can get part of your salary paid in bricks and pounds. So it's about paying staff in this, it's about giving change, it's about procuring other goods and services with other businesses. And then it's about the Scottish Government accepting it for taxes, but then also spending it back into the economy as well. And so this would really be where a lot of the work needs to happen and a lot of the kind of discussion. I think generally there's been a lot more knowledge now about the impact of the money system and some of the issues there. And I think a kind of forgotten sister issue of money is then the payment that about 64% of small and medium businesses in the UK, and it's only a UK figure, I assume it plays out even in Scotland, do not take digital payments at the moment. Whereas large businesses, so your Tesco's, your Sainsbury's, these kind of guys, not only will they take digital payments, they negotiate lower rates, and it basically creates this double advantage for large businesses over small businesses, where one, they accept digital currency, and there's research that shows that people want to pay digitally, and will not go to shops, will not go to shops that don't take digital payments, will spend more in shops that do take digital payments. But also those that do, then the SMEs lose more money than the large businesses. So it's basically these payment systems create a kind of double advantage for large businesses over small and medium businesses. And so that's the other thing that we wanted to try and look to resolve with the ScotPound proposal, was thinking about, well, why should the payment system be a private infrastructure? What if the payment system was like a public utility that we all used in the same way as the NHS and things like that? And what would there be benefits for the economy if we looked at it like that? Well, the FCA was a very kind of.
Excuse me, can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So what was the feelings that I got when meeting the Bank of England and the FCA and people like that? So from the FCA perspective, it was a very dry discussion about is this within the regulatory powers of the FCA to control? Is this e-money? Is this a payment system? And interestingly, it is neither e-money nor a payment system. under the regulations, which is very interesting given that it's electronic money on a payment system. But the technical language that the regulations use clearly put these kind of systems outside of the scope. So the FCA hasn't given a full this is out of scope, but from they basically confirm my understanding that this would be out of scope of anything the FCA looks at, and they wouldn't be controlling it. So the FCA is just kind of like, oh, that's very interesting, thank you very much for sharing. The Bank of England, so the Bank of England now has a digital currency division. So it has 5 people employed purely to look and understand the digital currencies. And so we got to meet with that team. They were very caged about obviously what they can say at this early time. What I did ask them to say was if there are any fundamental objections that you're going to come out with, immediately, that they would please let us know out of courtesy. And we've developed a really good relationship with them. So they come to us when they do announcements and ask them to check our text. And so we've had we've got good cooperation. They've also just employed a guy called Michael Kumhoff from the IMF, who is a really forward-thinking economist who is proposing things along the line of positive money for those of you who but he goes even further by wanting a $10 billion jubilee and things like that. So and he heads up the kind of digital currency research. So they're very, very interested. I could see their jaws drop because they did a report on local currencies just a while ago. And the Bristol pound, which is the biggest one that we had, see that when we were saying that on day one we were going to create 1 billion, his head was just, wow, that's actually quite different to 350,000, circulating in a town, in a city. So it will be really interesting to see, and some of the questions this morning at the Scottish Parliament are on the same lines. Are they going to try and block it? It's really hard to tell. I think that the Bank of England and Treasury would have to expend a lot of capital. They'd have to almost come up with new regulations to block this, and I think that they would feel that was tactically a poor move because it would really play into the hands of those who see the Bank of England as an enemy and just general Westminster as an enemy. So I'm really intrigued as to where the Bank of England's going to go on this. I don't think they're going to let it go completely unsupervised, but neither, I think, are they going to put their foot down. And much as Bank of England faces a lot of criticism, they are, of all the central banks, they are one of the more progressive, if that's not an oxymoron.
An add-on question.